talking about television shows. I don't know that we've had a sermon on television shows in all the years I've been here. And TV shows often get a bad rap, especially if you're as old as I am, or even older. Back in the days when television was much younger and you had to actually get up physically to change the channels, and you had 4 or 5 or 6 channels to choose from, it was often said that TV was a bad influence, especially on young minds. In fact, other than perhaps comic books or rock music, it was the #1 destroyer of young minds, and you had to get them out from in front of the TV and outside doing things. And I'm not downplaying the importance of that, but if you think about it, and if you're my age, you remember that television was often called the idiot box or the boob tube or something like that. And it was just very demeaning, like it had no positive values or influence on anyone, really. It was like this horrible thing that had entered our lives, and if only we didn't have it, everything would be so much better. Of course, we know that's not true just by looking at history. So what I want to talk about, and Courtney's going to do this also, is a different aspect of television. How television helps people who have an emptiness in their life, and how this can fill that emptiness. And as we worked on these, we also added a second element, how television can actually positively and dramatically influence where your life goes. This is not to downplay any of the negative aspects of television. I'm not ignorant of that. In fact, it is true that in some instances, television has this almost hypnotic control over people. And I don't say that lightly. I know of 2 different individuals who are older than I am, totally unrelated, don't know each other, have never met each other, but they both do the exact same thing. When they go and visit their families, and I mean, you know, they're traveling to go visit their families, it's not just popping in for the afternoon, what they like to do is sit in front of the TV and put on NCIS and marathon it, episode after episode after episode. It's constantly running. This is not an exaggeration. I'm not making this up. And these are people who've gone to visit their grandkids. And NCIS has to be on all the time. It does seem to have some kind of an influence over them that's this comforting or something. It's got to be on. A third man, and I've never met this man, but he's the father of one of my friends. He said, my dad has totally changed. He used to like sports, he used to like the news, he'd watch all this manly stuff, and now every night you have to watch the Hallmark movie. Doesn't matter what it is. He has got the Hallmark movie on every night. And again, even when visiting family or families visiting, it's time for the Hallmark movie, and it goes on. So yeah, there's that side of it too, and I understand that. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is how TV can provide comfort, perhaps even fill a void in your life. And so we're going to look at those positive aspects. And with that, we're going to move on to 2 stories of how this has happened in our lives. So, Courtney, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, yeah, you know, some of y'all know some of my background that I've discussed here. A lot of you might not. I've, you know, I don't want to go into it or I'll get sidetracked, but, you know, I've had problems with issues with addictive substances and things like that, and it took me a while to get my life back together and pick it up. But from the beginning, I was, what's the word, alone. I had trouble fitting in. And I mean, I have memories that go back so far, you know, farther than most people say they do. And some people say, even I was told by a doctor I'm a liar for having these memories. But I remember being in one of those, you know, those rubber things that stand up, and there's a net in there, and you know what I'm talking about, that you put babies and children in.
Oh, playpen.
Playpen.
Oh.
Yeah, I have memories of that. And anyway, and even then I had trouble fitting in. So I'll go ahead and read, or I'll get off track. But as an only child, since my parents, for some reason, absolutely insisted that we had to live out in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere, I was alone, right? This is before school or anything like that. I did have a babysitter I went to at the time, though. So I knew, before I started school that I was having trouble fitting in. That may have been because I'm an only child, and it may have been because I am adopted. And also, maybe early symptoms of some mental illnesses that I've had to deal with. I don't know that for sure, though. But I remember that the loneliness was stronger around people than it was, stronger when I was with people than when I wasn't with them. Which is, I know, it's, what's the word, paradoxical? It's not really the word I'm wanting, but anyway, and like I said, I've spoken to y'all about some of the issues that pulled me down into the darkness. And I take some responsibility for that, but there are some people who pulled me back up into the light. But I was sick, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. The disassociation between other people and even my own body and my own self-image, began before school started. From observations in professional through my first years of life, there were expectations about me beginning to be put into place. It came from, me being above average seeming. And I'm not here to brag about that, it's just a fact. My parents had been told by some doctor that I was above average intelligence, and later IQ tests confirmed this, it seemed. Those achievement tests, does everybody remember those? Taking, those long days and having to eat a good breakfast, they said. Anyway, I aced all those, and I had a pretty high IQ, but so now it was written in stone. I was smart, whatever that means, and further expectations were put upon me, and it got worse as things went on, and I got further away from those expectations. The further out, the more hard my parents would try to make me meld into these expectations, and the worse it would get. So they inevitably fell short. I felt assaulted on sides, and this from all sides. And this was when I was growing up, and started small, got bigger and bigger. And for what, I wasn't quite sure. It just seemed like I was always in trouble for something. But and even before school, And then there was something though that made me feel better, that broke the loneliness. It was those Saturday morning cartoons for a long time. Saturday, I'd wake up and I'd think, it's Saturday, by the time I knew what Saturday was, and, which was about 5 maybe, and I'd be so excited, I'd run down there and watch TV, and then I saw something that ruined Saturday morning cartoons for me forever. I saw this little show called Land of the Lost, and let's see, it was my relief from the drudging hours of school, and I was having these bad nightmares, and I had night terrors and all that. But this show, it captivated me and fired my imagination. It was about this family that went through a wormhole-like thing. They didn't call it that, but that's what it was. Through time and space, and wound up in this gravitationally locked-in universe. And this universe was so locked in that in order for something to leave, something of equal, what they called temporal potential, had to enter. You couldn't leave unless something very similar to you came in. and had math, same math, and all that. It was very scientific because Larry Niven had a hand in the writing of it. But anyway, there was a river that went. You started on the river, and they started on the river. They thought they could get out that way because they got in there through water, and they started on the river near the swamp that was near where the cave where they lived. And they came through the river, and when they came, finally, they came back to the swamp again. And so the gravitational, gravity was warped, and light was warped around this little torus-shaped place. And you couldn't, you couldn't, but anyway, I'm getting off. But it was built to buffer, as a buffer between universes, we found out later. And living alien machines control the weather, the time doorways, which they called them, whether they were space or time doorways. So traveling between the universes, this place was built to make it safe, to make it stable, so that this advanced race called the Altrusians could travel through time and space and through universes as well. The reason I started watching it was the dinosaurs, but after I saw this stuff, the pylons and the slee stack and then the cool ideas about they were in a time loop on one episode, and that, dinosaurs, who didn't forget that, Anyway, it fired my imagination. I started making up my own stories. I took my little dolls and I started making up stories where they were in the land of the lost. And anyway, but as I grew older and learned how to read, I learned that this show was called science fiction, and most of all, that science fiction was not very well respected by my teachers and peers in those days. Nowadays, it gets mad respect, but back then, not so much. And so I would tell my teachers about it, because I was so excited on Monday to tell them about it. And instead of, and they always said the same thing. Well, aren't you they didn't say, well, aren't you an imaginative child? Why don't you create your own stories and we shall find a form for publication? They didn't say that. You know what they said, I'm sure most of you. They said, if you put as much effort into your work as you do thinking about this garbage, you might actually get somewhere. All of them. But I didn't know where the somewhere was. I didn't know what it was supposed to be. But I knew if they were going to be there, and those people they thought were so great were going to be there, I didn't want to be anywhere near this somewhere, right? Anyway, I'm hurrying things. I was warned about my length.
Yeah, you're 10 minutes.
But I began to read the names of each and every story that came across the screen. The names of the authors, big and bold. And I discovered that they wrote this science fiction, and I thought, man, I'd like to write that too. Then one day during the summer, between 2nd and 3rd grade, I found the show, man. It was a live action show. I'd seen it on a cartoon, so I avoided it because I didn't like the cartoon very much. Maybe it was over my head, or maybe I just, it was moved too fast or something, but I didn't like it like I liked Land of the Lost. So I avoided it, but there was nothing else to watch one day, so I turned it on. It was called Star Trek, the original series. And all of a sudden, I noticed that it would always say what the author's name was, D.C. Fontana, Jerome Bixby, Norman Spinrad. I remembered these names from Land of the Lost. And David Gerald, especially, creator of Tribbles. And, he actually created Land of the Lost. And I didn't know that. And so when I went back to watch this thing, at first I didn't know it, I started watching the characters, and they were just enthralling. The acting was, even for the time, the effects weren't that great, but the acting was enthralling. First thing I saw was Mr. Spock stealing the USS Enterprise and I didn't know what for, You know, but I found out, you know, it was a two-parter, the only two-parter they ever made, and but it ended on a Friday. Had to wait all the way till Monday to see the next one, and I couldn't sleep on Sunday night, you know. Anyway, you know, it was about Captain Pike and his. Yeah, any of you that know this, you know which episode I'm talking about. But anyway, it's not relevant. But it had so much in common. I found out, yeah, that they were written by, that it was actually created by David Gerald. Even though Sid and Marty Krofft have their name on it, they didn't expect David Gerald to do what he did and turn it into a sci-fi show. They thought he was going to make a kids show, and there was a lot of junk over that. But you know, for me, Land of the Lost led to Star Trek, and it was a natural transition to a show with more adult themes from a simple show. And Star Trek, especially for me, you know, because I was always getting pushed out of line by the kids who were bigger than me, you know, because I wasn't, you know, I was weak, you know, physically not able to, you know, stand up for myself. And but Star Trek showed people with brains, not just brawn, who could, you know, who defeated these other people that were well, aliens that were using brawn to take over everybody, like the Klingons. And you know, so from that I had some problems, but now that I've returned back and I've been clean for a while, this is what Star Trek did for me. It helped. It made me see that science was cool. So I got a degree in science. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I just want y'all to know that I attribute this directly to Star Trek. And scenarios and articles I wrote for tabletop role-playing games that were science fiction, you know, on starships. And I had some success there, and I'm still trying to do it. You know, and I'm still working on that, and I got published in a book of the best scenarios for the game that I was writing for, and so that's what those two shows, created and written for the same group of people, really. One younger than the other, though, did for me. And without that, none of those things that I did that would have occurred in my life, no writing, no science degree, no, you know, postgraduate work, none of it. I did something for NASA even once, and it was all because of Star Trek, really. And, but I'll give you this, I don't know where I would be now. And y'all, I'm going to make a Bob Dylan quote. I'm sorry, but that's just me. People always wanted me, it seemed like, to be like them. But I could only be like me. And that was okay, I found out after a while. My life is not perfect right now, but hey, I'm just getting started, right? Yeah. All right.
My elementary school years were pretty terrible. My father was in the Air Force, and I moved constantly. Starting in second grade, I switched schools at least once every year. In third grade, I was in California. In fourth grade, I was in Alabama. In fifth grade, I was in Florida, then Massachusetts. And in sixth grade, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Virginia. 3 different schools. As you might imagine, this was pretty tough. And I did not have any long-term friends. I was constantly the new kid in the class, and when you're in this situation, what you long for is what so many other kids had, just some stability. You long for friends that you don't have to say goodbye to every year. Friends that you can have for more than a year. In fifth grade, my father was deployed to Thailand to fight in Vietnam. And in addition to all that moving around, I did not have my dad around for a year. And during this time, my friends and I started watching Star Trek reruns. It wasn't live at that point, so it was on every day in the afternoon. And we would gather together and watch Star Trek, often with one of our parents. And I don't remember a lot about it, but I do remember doing it, and it must have become a daily activity because when I moved from Massachusetts to Colorado, once again leaving behind really good friends, they did not have Star Trek on at all in Denver. What a backwoods city that was. And at this point, something in me snapped. At this time, there was the Saturday morning Star Trek that Courtney mentioned, and I would watch that, and that was all I would get. I couldn't get my daily dose of Star Trek. And I still vividly remember, one Saturday morning, I slept too long, and I missed half of my Star Trek episode, and that was devastating to me. I know that sounds dumb, but it was devastating. And this made a dramatic change in my life because my parents introduced me to the concept of an alarm clock. And Friday night, I set that stinking alarm clock because I wasn't going to miss any more Star Trek. And I also started taping it. Now, you didn't have videotapes back then, so I did the audio tapes, and I would listen to Star Trek over and over. I can only imagine what it would have been like if I could have watched it over and over as a kid, because I would have. And my parents started to get a little concerned about how much I would listen to one of these stupid episodes just over and over. And they actually talked to me about it, and I said, you know what? These are my friends. And I remember saying that. And, you know, that sounds weird now, but remember, you're moving around all the time, and you're constantly trying to make new friends. And in Denver, that was a terrible place where I lived. We had a bunch of teenage thugs in the area, and I had like one or two friends that I could sometimes do something with. I got bused halfway across the city because they were doing integration at the time in the school, so even though there's a school literally walking distance right down the street, I couldn't go to that school. So it was a mess. And why did all this happen? Why this particular show? And was it healthy? Did it fill a void, or did it just help me avoid problems? Well, I'm not really sure why I became so attached to Star Trek, but I did. My best guess is, again, this desire for continuity. Massachusetts was a great place for me, even though my dad wasn't there. We lived right next to woods. The Appalachian Trail was literally a couple hundred yards behind where I lived, and we'd go out and hike on the Appalachian Trail. And it was a great place to be a fifth grader. And then I got moved to Denver, which to me was like moving from paradise to an armpit. It was, and my best friends I had to leave behind. And all I had left was this Star Trek show. And I did not get, you know, the school was a terrible place, a bunch of bullies, and it was just a mess. And the one friend I had was the kid who sat in the back and goofed off and made me laugh all the time. So I'm constantly getting satisfactory in my behavior on my report card. I'm not getting excellent or outstanding, I'm getting satisfactory, which might as well have been a death knell for me. And my mother just could not understand why I was such a poorly behaved child. And all we're doing is laughing, and, you know, understandably annoying to the teacher, but we weren't doing anything destructive. We were having a good time. But even that I couldn't do in this school. So what I did do every week was comb through the TV guide. Because one day I went to school and one of the kids said, hey, Star Trek was on Saturday night. And this was just some anomaly. It had to fill in for a sports event that got canceled or something. So then, every week, I would search through the TV guide, every single page of those old-style TV guides, to see if maybe Star Trek was going to be on that week. But it wasn't. I never did see a live-action Star Trek in Denver. Then I moved to Virginia, and they had Star Trek on every afternoon. And at that point, my life really hit a tipping point, because not only did I start watching Star Trek regularly again, now I was starting to remember it better, learn the actors' names and all this stuff. I also started reading science fiction. And if any of you know me at all, you know I am a super geek. I love science fiction and have always loved it since this point. I've watched Star Trek when all the new iterations came out. I've always loved it. I will defend it to the death. But I still couldn't figure out what it was that, you know, this show filled in for my friends. And then I found it. It was a book I read in junior high school that was, amongst other things, analyzing this Star Trek fan scene. And in it, the author says, and I wish I remembered the book and the author, but the author said that Star Trek, at its core, is not about science fiction. It is a buddy show. It's about friends. Kirk, Spock, McCoy. And I went, duh, that is it. I was looking for friends, I didn't have friends, and here's 3 guys and the surrounding crew who were friends. And it all became clear. That is what drove the original Star Trek. And why, by the way, the next generation doesn't hold a candle to the original Star Trek. Because of the friendships. The seemingly genuine, deep friendships on that show. It was that emotional core that struck me. And I think that is the driving force. Now, it's true that Star Trek offered a very positive view of the future at a time when things were looking pretty bleak. It made bold steps in the area of integration, for instance. Nichelle Nichols, who was a black female, played Lieutenant Uhura, the first time a black female was an officer on any TV show. It also had the first kiss, or first interracial kiss. It also had people from many different countries represented. We had Japan, Russia, Scotland, and even a minor character, Dr. Mabenga, who appeared in 2 episodes, was a Ugandan medical doctor. So they are constantly pushing against what was going on in the 60s. Those of you who remember the 60s, civil rights were being fought for, and here was a show that was acting as though it's a done deal. Yeah. And even though those things are incredibly important, not to mention the emphasis on a positive view of the future, I don't think those were the things that struck the chord in my life. I think it was the friendships. So, what we're going to be doing during the next hour is, and I've warned Courtney, we're not getting into Star Trek trivia. That's not what Talkback is about. Because if you want to talk Star Trek, we could go on the whole hour just about Star Trek. But what I'm looking for are perspectives from all of you about how shows had either a really dramatic effect on your life or filled a void in your life. We want to hear the other stories. It's not about our stories anymore, it's about yours. So, good or bad, positive or negative, it is clear that TV has an effect in many people's lives. We've given you a couple of positive effect stories to talk about, and we're curious to see if you have those stories also in the next hour. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks, Courtney, for participating in this with me, and hopefully you'll all stick around for the discussion the next hour. Thanks.
Thank you.